Yeah, good morning everybody, and also from my side, welcome to this press conference. Before handing over to our new president, just want to kind of say a few words on the fact that this year we are celebrating our 25th anniversary as ACEA, which was created in '91. At the time we merged several automotive industry organizations. You could say that in '91 we took an act of moving forward, simplify things, and get our act together as an industry to have one organization representing the voice of the automotive industry, which makes us today, frankly, the only one automotive industry organizations in the world bringing together all global players, not only European manufacturers but also the non-European manufacturers who have operations and research here in Europe. In these 25 years, a lot has changed. I look back, Googled back what happened in '91. This was the year that under the then Dutch presidency, we had a Dutch presidency again in '91, second half of '91, we also had a Dutch presidency. They negotiated the member states in Maastricht, this famous Maastricht Treaty, which was then signed the year afterwards, and which was the basis for what we currently know as the European Union. And of course, this was a pivotal or milestone year for us to be created, because since then we've seen lots of new regulations coming our way to regulate the sector. I think our sector has become one of the most regulated sectors. And that triggers also some challenges, because we are also the most innovative sector, one of the most innovative sectors, and it's always hard and difficult to catch innovation with regulation. We've gone through that experience again recently again. So with that, by way of introduction, welcome, and would like to give the floor now to our President, Dr. Zetsche.
Thanks, Eric, and good morning from my side as well. Eric referred to me as a new president. As you may know, this is the third time I have the honor to serve as president of ACEA. I think that proves I really appreciate that job. This year, however, it will be difficult for me to stay neutral as ACEA president, especially in June and July. That's when the football Euro Cup takes place. And I've already told Eric that according to my taste, prospects for the Belgian national team are a little bit too strong. But beyond football, I think we are well aligned and off to a good year. That was affirmed just last week, like most of my colleagues. Of course, I was at the North American International Auto Show. As you know, the US market is somewhat challenging for at least some of European manufacturers due to the strong position of the domestic brands. But from what I saw at the Detroit show, it's fair to say in many ways European manufacturers are leading the way, from efficient drivetrains to steps in self-driving or autonomous vehicles. With that in mind, I'd just like to address two questions this morning. First, what do we expect from the European car market? And second, what do we expect from policymakers? Let's start with the market. In the recent past, we've mostly had to look to countries outside the EU to increase vehicle sales. But after several pretty rocky years since the 2008 financial crisis, the European car market is moving in the right direction again. In 2015, EU passenger car sales grew by 9.3% compared to 2014, bringing the total number of cars sold to 13.7 million units. That's great progress, but bear in mind that we are still well below the 2007 pre-crisis levels of 15.5 million cars. That's different, for instance, in the US. The picture is very similar when we look at production numbers. In 2015, EU passenger car output was up 6.2% compared to 2014. In total, around 15.9 million cars were produced last year, but again, this is still down from almost 70 million in 2007. The recovery of commercial vehicle sales even reached double-digit growth, with heavy commercial vehicle demand posting the strongest growth rate of about 20%. For 2016, we anticipate a much more modest sales increase for both passenger cars and commercial vehicles. We expect car sales to go up by around 2%, reaching roughly 14 million units. Commercial vehicle markets are also expected to grow moderately in 2016. Those numbers reflect growing uncertainty regarding the global economy and security situation. So with the recovery in the auto market and industry continuing at a more modest pace, it is also a little less robust. As we move forward in this year, we have what a cynic might call an excellent opportunity not to screw things up. This goes for all of us, both in the auto industry and policy arena. Therefore, I appreciate any opportunity for dialogue. Dialogue will become even more important for our industry, given the challenges ahead of us, which will require closer collaboration with other sector organizations, including suppliers, dealers, telecom companies, but also, of course, with policymakers. That brings me to my second question. What do we expect from policymakers? Although our products and industry are going through some fundamental changes right now, the definition of good regulation has changed little. It's still about reliability, consistency, and access to market opportunities. Let's start with reliability. Vehicles are immensely and increasingly complex products that take quite a while to be developed, tested, and put into production. Even in an increasingly digitalized world, we are talking about a lead time of 4 to 7 years. On the truck side, perhaps even a little longer. Accordingly, manufacturers and suppliers alike must rely on policy makers to give them enough time to react to changes. This is especially true when it comes to emission standards. Let me be very clear on this. We fully accept the auto industry's responsibility to bring down all emissions, as we have proven by the enormous efforts and means we have already put into making our cars greener. And we will continue to further reduce CO2 emissions, but those efforts take time. Therefore, we need a long-term and reliable regulatory framework. And let's not forget, we already have extremely ambitious emission standards in place for the end of this decade. We need to give all stakeholders time to realize the reduction potentials of given regulations and to implement new technologies. Rushing new measures will fail to deliver their intended results. Of course, we continue to make progress with alternative drivetrains, and we want to do more in this area, provided we can increase the market uptake. We also see more potential intelligent transport systems to contribute to further reductions of emissions. But efficient combustion engines will remain the major lever in determining how much we actually decrease emissions in the medium term. And high-tech diesel engines are critical to that equation. They emit up to 20% less CO2 than comparable petrol engines. So it would be foolish not to take advantage of that technology. That leads me to the next quality we expect from politics: consistency. There's no doubt we need new testing cycles in Europe. In fact, we've been talking about both the WLTP cycle and real driving emissions for quite a while now. And especially with regard to RDE, it is absolutely paramount to introduce the new regulation to come to more representative results. However, important regulations on CO2 emissions and test cycles continue to be drafted separately, disregarding important interconnections. So on one fairly small step to better regulation would simply be to harmonize introduction dates to a reasonable extent. And there's one more thing we hope for, and that's support to tap greater market opportunities for Europe's auto manufacturers and suppliers. In a time where many European countries are building walls up instead of tearing them down, we need political partners that continue to stand by the principles of free trade. The auto industry, like virtually every other European industry, can best thrive in an environment without trade barriers. That is true for the European market, but it is also true for the TTIP negotiations. Trade barriers and closed borders have one thing in common. The underlying reason for them is fear, either of other people or of other industries. But like I said before, there's absolutely nothing the European car industry has to be afraid of. In a fair political framework, we are very competitive, not only on a European, but on a global scale. Ladies and gentlemen, the auto show in Detroit also reminded me of another thing. These are the most exciting times I've experienced in the industry in the course of my career, which is much longer than I care to admit. Yet, the fundamental changes in this industry have only just begun to take shape. What we can expect to see in the next 10 to 20 years is nothing short of revolutionary. And we can seize this opportunity despite the uncertainties we now face in this world. We as auto and policymakers can do so by working together on rational solutions that serve our common good as well as our common goals. Speaking for ACEA, I know the auto industry will hold up its end of the bargain by driving innovation for a cleaner mobility, safer mobility, smarter mobility, and even more consumer-focused mobility. That's what we bring to the table. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zetsche. So Mr. Armstrong is now going to run through the global market, and he'll be running through some of these slides, which printouts of which we left on your chairs.
Thank you very much. Tim Armstrong from IHS. Just a point of clarification, we're an independent forecaster, so we're non-aligned with anybody or organisation. We're here as esteemed guests to describe the global automotive market. I'm going to talk a bit about light vehicle demand, the global economy, the outlook for oil, and market shares and alternative powertrains. So I'll try to give you a flavour of the overall industry outlook, concentrating on demand for the next few years, and to do that within around 10 minutes. So it's going to be quite a sprint. There's a rebalancing of global economic growth that we've been experiencing for quite some time now. We've had the move and the rapid pace of globalization to emerging markets, which has then slowed, and in the last couple of years we've seen it now shift back to the much more mature markets. So the big engines of growth in an economy, a global economy which is going to accelerate mildly in 2016, still going to be the US, where broad-based consumption growth is still pretty strong, notwithstanding the pretty poor start to the stock market that we've had already this year. So there's a lot of nervousness and risk around this. But broadly speaking, the United States growth grows from about 2.5 to 2.7% in 2016, and it's broad-based. It's the consumer, and you can see that in the autos figures where we're approaching 18 million units. Really a record for the industry. The autos industry in Europe has been pretty strong in 2015. We see a mild acceleration in economic growth, about 1.7% this year. Low oil prices are helping. Weak euro is helping the export position. Consumption is increasing a little bit, and of course we've had more stimulus from the central bank in December in terms of quantitative easing and credit availability. It's a low inflation environment, so we see some strength in the economies, but again, it's imbalanced. We see recoveries in the south from a low base, but reasonable strength in the core and the Franco-German core. The big question for the global economy is still, of course, China, and you've seen the rout in the stock market in the last few weeks. We don't think that that's going to derail the global economy, because the linkages between the Chinese stock market and global financial markets are still fairly small, and we don't see this per se as being a cause for really undermining global growth. But it's certainly something that keeps everybody nervous, and we've seen the terrible performance in global stocks already this year, which is obviously impacting purchasing power in markets like, and the wealth effect in markets like the US. Other emerging markets suffering from the plunge in commodity markets, clearly Brazil and Russia really struggling. Brazil, something of a lost decade in terms of policy response and growth. Equally in Russia, where we think we've hit the bottom, at least in the auto market, but it's going to be a long climb upwards. In terms of the oil price, so a lot of risk on the downside. I think we were at $28 a barrel in the last couple of days. Trace that back to just 18 months ago when we were over 100 before Saudi Arabia stopped being the swing producer in the global market. Down from an average of $39 already in December. So we're really seeing the market struggling to find a balance, and with significant risks on the downside through 2016. We have Iran coming back in as a supplier. It's probably going to take more effort than they think to really increase capacity significantly, because capacity requires investment, and at $28 a barrel there's not too much investment around. Spare capacity will be relatively thin, we think, by the end of 2016. So our base case oil forecast right now is for the market returning to some kind of balance by the end of 2016, with a fairly muted recovery over the next few years. Oil transfer and wealth transfer, because of the low oil price, is pretty big, right? So when oil fell, there was about $1.5 to $2 trillion of wealth transfer from oil exporters to oil importers, with the US being the main beneficiary. That's worked its way mostly through the system, but a car buyer in the US is now about $1,000 or $1,500 better off at the pump every year. Some of that being translated then into auto sales and providing that momentum, but most of that's worked through the system. In terms of the car market, we see a mild acceleration globally. The overall car market in light vehicles has been pretty strong over the last few years in general. Of course, we still think that China is going to provide much of that growth, and the stimulus that we've seen in China that came in after the weakness in the summer of 2015 is now providing an uplift to lift that market by another 1.3 million units this year. So we think China is still providing a third to a half of global economic growth. So still, all bets are still on China. But the US has been the other area of expansion with Europe in the last couple of years as those markets have recovered. So globally we see about 2.5 to 2.7% growth, perhaps a little more, in light vehicle demand, which is not a bad result, although it is still pretty imbalanced by historical standards. On the European side, we've had a good year in 2015. It's going to slow down dramatically in 2016. We think we're around 2% passenger car for EU 28, about 2.5% for light vehicles in EU 30. The southern economies have come back from a low base and have been driving the 9% growth we saw last year. We think it's going to be more like 2 to 2.5% this year as that recovery now then stabilizes. France has been pretty good as the French market has recovered somewhat as well, and Germany is still obviously at the core in 2016 in terms of growth. In terms of market share, we see some adjustment here. VW has been losing market share for a while, and so the momentum in that brand, VW brand, is likely to be lower for some time, partly driven by its model portfolio. Renault-Nissan has been a big beneficiary in the last 12 months or so. Strong model portfolio, helped by recovery in France, of course, and amongst the premiums, the Daimler has been strong in terms of its model profile, and the move towards compact premium has been pretty successful in the last 18 months or so. On the production side, we have growth about 2%, again a slowdown. The mix of imports and exports is still important in Europe. Production is going to be feeding the lower, the southern countries more, of course, in 2016. But the imports and exports are still an important factor in terms of the success of the overall industry, particularly as markets like the US are still fairly strong. The last comment then about diesel, and diesel has been, of course, in structural decline. In terms of our analysis, In EU28, it's moved from sales a few years ago in really around 2/3 of the market to about 51% in 2015. And we see this structural decline obviously continuing, with perhaps risk on the downside in terms of how fast that might be achieved. Obviously, in terms of legislation, the grassroots impact of things like restrictions in the park in Paris, for example, are having some impact. Our forecast then is the continued decline in diesel. It's still going to be a significant part of the overall mix, but the rise is going to be in terms of alternative powertrain across hybrid, battery electric, and various other forms of locomotion, which will rise to about 20% in our estimation by around 2023. Of course, in terms of the penetration, it varies a lot by segment. So we see diesel being much more impacted in A segment, in the small cars, whereas in larger segments, in E segment, for example, it will still have a significant role to play. So bottom line, in terms of our outlook, we see a mild acceleration in global growth, pretty unbalanced, and a significant state of flux, with mature markets carrying growth and a risk on the downside. We see low oil for some time, with the market trying to find a balance by 2016, but certainly several years before we really see capacity and prices come back strongly. We see a mild acceleration in light vehicle demand from 2015. China, US, and to a lesser extent Europe then leading the charge, with a slowdown in Europe, as I said, to the sort of low 2%. And then we see the structural decline in terms of petrol diesel mix, but the rise of alternative powertrain inexorably over the next 10 years or so. So with that, I think we open to questions.
So just before we open up for your questions for Dr. Zetsche, Mr. Junghardt, and Mr. Armstrong, just a reminder that Dr. Zetsche is speaking today in his capacity as President of ACEA, so we'll be happy to take your industry-wide questions. We won't ever take company-specific ones. So with that, if you could just say your name and media outlet and
Matthias Verbeek for the Wall Street Journal. You cited a question for Mr. Zetsche. You cited economic and the security situation in Europe as a reason for the slowdown in growth. Could you elaborate on that maybe a little bit?
I mean, first of all, of course, there is has always been a pretty strong correlation between the overall GDP development and the auto market. That's especially true for commercial vehicles, but for passenger cars to quite some extent as well. So that correlation therefore is more or less a given. That on the other hand, the GDP itself is, if not affected, so at least threatened by the security situation we're having, I think it's pretty obvious as well. And when you add the refugee development, which is a consequence of the security situation, not particularly in Europe, but around Europe, then of course you have at least a high level of uncertainty and potential volatility by trying to forecast the future.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Helena from Politico. How does it feel to become president in the middle of the Dieselgate scandal? And do you have any strategies put in place to face the challenges of the automotive sector?
Well, first of all, of course, we recognize what has gone wrong. At the same time, this doesn't change the fact that the auto industry has, as Eric already mentioned, the highest R&D budgets of all industries, which means it stands for innovation. At the same time, it's the biggest employer in Europe, and as an industry altogether, we have made a lot of progress, and therefore I think it's a special responsibility and is especially important at that point of time to maintain balanced view, recognize what has gone wrong, but still build on what we did right and try to develop that forward, and therefore it feels good in that situation.
Jörg Münchenberg, Deutschlandfunk. There are a lot of experts who say that Dieselgate is the tip of the iceberg. What do you tell this kind of expert? And the second question, if you allow, how big is your concern? What does it mean for diesel in Europe? Are you concerned that you will decline because of the Dieselgate?
First of all, as long as my memory goes, there always has been some groups who were no real fans of diesel for different reasons at different times. This hasn't changed. Secondly, from the customer's point of view, the decision for diesel, like many other decisions as well, are mostly driven by economics. And from a manufacturer's point of view, we have very stringent CO2 targets, which we totally support. And as diesel engines, by definition, based on physics, provide a roughly 20% advantage in CO2 emission, they are a very important element of achieving the targets we are committed to. For all of these reasons, and once again acknowledging the fact that for different reasons some people would rather see diesel disappear, we think that diesel is overall an important and valid technology. There's no contradiction between low emissions beyond CO2 and diesels. Technology allows us to reduce emissions overall for diesel significantly. We have done that in a very significant way in recent years, and Euro 6 plus RDE will lead to another significant reduction in diesel emissions, and that's why we are totally supportive of these regulations and want to see them. I do believe that the current level of oil prices, in spite of all the turmoil we had around, as you said, Dieselgate, I do believe the current level of oil prices will have a bigger impact on customer behavior as far as the share of diesel is concerned than all this discussion, and therefore it depends on whether the forecasts we heard before will prove to be correct as far as recovery of fuel prices or oil prices are concerned, and that I think will have the biggest impact on the share of diesels. It's clear as well, just very briefly, that of course the cleaner the diesel gets, the more technology it takes to get there. And this technology, of course, is increasing the cost of diesel, and therefore, for instance, as was mentioned in AB segments, we see a very small portion of diesels being left because they have a ratio between the absolute saving on overall lower levels and the cost to get there is starting to flip.
Christopher Ziegler, Stuttgarter Zeitung. Mr. Zetsche, could you tell us a bit how you think the political risks in the European Union could impact on the economic outlook you just presented? I'm thinking of the in and out referendum in Great Britain that could take place in summer, and of course also concerning the refugee crisis where yesterday Austria announced that levels for migration, and a lot of talk about a possible domino effect on border closures. Could you tell us how these political risks may impact on your economic outlook?
Not mainly, but certainly as well because of their economical consequences. I am a still proponent of a strongly unified Europe, and anything which has impact to the opposite and creates centrifugal forces will have a negative impact on their economic outlook. That's my strong conviction. beyond that general statement, you have very specific ones. We are extremely intertwined in the way our processes are working. That specifically means that a lot of our goods are moving between different locations throughout the countries, and just the practical consequences of borderline controls and trucks lining up for kilometers and just-in-time deliveries not being there just in time anymore has a significant impact on the cost of building products in Europe and beyond. So from these more practical points of view as well, the developments of course are not welcome at all. But again, even though I'm representing a company, in this case now an industry, of course the pure economical aspect is just one aspect, and the humanitarian is more relevant overall.
Sorry, to follow up, Jeroen Zegenhout, Financial Daily in the Netherlands. Is there already an impact of the border controls? Do you see that for the industry or your company?
We are still able to keep our logistics running, but we see increasing risks. I mean, I personally sometimes have to take different routes to come to certain locations because it's faster to take a longer distance versus crossing more borders, and that is definitely, as long as I'm not talking about flying, so that's definitely not good development. Now it doesn't matter at all what my itinerary is, how it's working, but it's giving me a personal impression of what's going on there, and therefore so far no, but it's certainly an increasing risk.
Okay, so Philip, I think you had a question.
Philip Williams from Reuters. I wanted to ask, well, actually partly about your forecast, because this time last year you were also forecasting 2%, or 2.1% passenger car increase for 2015, of course. I just wondered what changed last year that you suddenly got 9.3%, and specifically about the forecast this year. You're saying the north is slowing, Spain is also slowing, but the rest, where is the rest, is gaining momentum?
So good questions. I think one thing that we've seen globally, actually, in response to what was something of a risky economic environment was the application of stimulus, right? So you can look at that in a couple of ways. Clearly, directly in China, once you had 3 months of Chinese demand that went down in the summer, you had the tax reductions that actually have had a significant impact on that part of the world. If you look into Europe, we've had a fairly anemic market for the last few years, but here again, there's a lot of stimulus going on in the market, particularly in the south, where you have scrapping campaigns, you have a lot of incentives going around. So these sort of policy changes are things that you can partially predict. It's a little tricky to think about the timing. When they do come in, they come in with quite a result. And so that combination of that stimulus in the south plus a recovery off the bottom was faster than we might have thought in terms of growth in Europe. And it is that rebalancing, though, I think in 2016, whereby you've had those southern economies come back quite sharply. How much petrol is still in the motor, so to speak? We've seen the UK, for example, lead the recovery. It had a deep recession, and then it had a pretty robust recovery over the last few years. And where that peaks is probably about now in terms of the overall outlook. So it's that timing issue, I would say. With the application of stimulus as well.
You say, where are the areas which are gaining momentum in Europe then?
So if you look at France, for example, there's strong growth, strong model cycle policy. You're seeing, but not so much for PSA, but you're seeing Renault with a significant launch of new product, particularly in the compact SUV. You've got the Kadjar, you've had Juke, you've had Qashqai. These things make a difference when they're launched, and they can push the market quite hard. So you can see France, you still see Germany reporting decent growth this year, and you still see Spain reporting pretty decent growth.
I think this is a question probably for the Secretary General. It's following up on something I asked before Christmas as well at your previous press conference. Just returning to the RDE testing and the scrutiny that that's facing in the Parliament and Council at the moment. The vote on that's been delayed in Parliament, and obviously it was quite strongly rejected by the Environment Committee. Before Christmas you were saying that any delay and the uncertainty that any delay creates. I was just wondering what that specific delay of a vote, whether that's had any short-term impact on the industry that you're feeling, or is that just continued uncertainty for the industry?
It's of course continued uncertainty for the industry. Clearly, if we want to solve the issue at stake, and that is reduce the current discrepancy between the results of in-lab tests which all manufacturers have to comply with because they are imposed by the current regulation, and real driving emissions. If we want to reduce this discrepancy, we urgently need a decision by the institutions on what new test we need to comply with. And that's in fact key, especially if we want to be able to start implementing as from 2017. Because the dates which are currently set for us is 2017 you would need to start complying with this new test. Industry wants to go ahead, wants to move forward, but we are not able to start planning for such a move as long as the details are not decided yet. And currently it looks still like a moving target. So we are hopeful, we want to stay positive. We know the vote which was expected this week in the Parliament has been postponed now to the first week of February. And so we really hope that the decision will be taken soon. The sooner the decision is taken, the sooner we can move ahead, and the sooner we can end this current discrepancy which will continue to exist as long as this decision is not taken.
Jun Narita from the Japanese Music Institute. In terms of free trade, so you mentioned TTIP, I would like to ask about negotiation with Japan. So this year it can be a crucial year for negotiation. And so what's your perspective for the negotiations? And as ASEA's point of view, what will be necessary elements to reach the agreement, especially so that Japan could have elimination of tariff barrier from the European side?
First of all, it applies what I said before, that the European automakers are supportive of free trade in general. Secondly, this is based on the assumption of level playing fields. And therefore, when you speak about free trade, you have to look at the total at all dimensions. And this is about tariffs, of course, but that's, for instance, about non-tariff barriers as well. And that is, to my knowledge, the key point of discussion between Japan and Europe. And to the extent, now you asked for the European perspective, I'm giving you the European perspective, to the extent there are perceived or real non-tariff barriers existing will be reduced, eliminated. The likelihood of an agreement, again from Europeans' perspective, will increase the likelihood of agreement.
Yes.
Marie from Bloomberg. What are the ramifications for the industry of the French investigation of Renault and testing emissions on 100 vehicles industry-wide?
Well, first of all, it's more than understandable when we have these results in one industry's case about vehicles not reflecting the rules being applied and accepted. It's a normal reaction that the officials want to know what about the others. I think that is more than acceptable and actually their duty. And within that context, to my best knowledge, we have seen a number of cases where the physical necessary deviation between the results on the test stand, which only reflects a small or represents a small part of the total cycle a vehicle can be used for, is going beyond normal expected dimensions. And these cases has been looked into in more depth. To my understanding, in no case finding these now famous defeat devices, which means conscious circumvention of the law, but a bad job in using the technology to get good emission results. And that's, to my understanding, but I only can say to my understanding, because I'm not involved in these investigations in particular, to my understanding, the case at Renault. And that's why, to my understanding, again, they accepted to improve that sloppy job. But we are not talking about any illegal actions being committed in this or other cases I'm aware of. Yeah.
If I may add to that, I mean, the discrepancies which came out of some of these investigations, and they continue to come out, confirm what we all know. Okay? And that's why we say, also as an industry, we need to, kind of try to make an end to this whole debate, which is not going to help anybody moving forward. We need, as industry, immediate clarity on what testing we should use now, because the current situation leads eventually to everybody using their own tests, and the outcome of which will then not be comparable anymore, and will lead to more confusion with consumers. So, in the interest of consumers, in the interest of environment, I think we need to make sure that this testing is clarified as soon as possible. Then we're going to see, that emission results will really reflect real driving emissions. I want to underline the fact that the current proposal on the table, which is still not agreed upon, would lead to a situation where, for the first time in the world, a real driving emission test would be implemented. So that doesn't happen anywhere else.
For cars.
Okay, for cars, yeah. For passenger cars.
For trucks, they exist.
I think we can take just one last question, short question if possible.
Leo Senrick from The Independent. I'd like to ask you about the reputation of the overall industry in the wake of these emissions revelations. Just been hearing about Renault. There have been suggestions about Opel. Many people now see the overall industry, not just VW, as fundamentally dishonest on when it comes to compliance. Do you agree that there is a problem with the reputation of the industry in that sense? And if so, what could you do about it?
We have the factual problem of an overlay of two issues. One issue being you on purpose add some elements to your software control which circumvent existing regulations, or if you want to put it more bluntly, it's called as cheating device. Yeah.
Defeat device.
Defeat device is their official, but of course it's perceived the way I said. And the other fact, which is once again, since a long time, we have, and that's a good thing, first of all, defined, standardized test procedure, how you can compare results wherever you measure with these definitions. That's a good thing in the first place. But this procedure takes out of the full cycle whatever you can do with a vehicle. Drive slow, fast, accelerate, brake, do that more or less, and all of that. One portion out of this total cycle what you can do with a car. And within this portion it's defined how the car has to behave and what the limits of emissions are. And these are, in all these other cases, adhered to. And now you have the rest, which is just not defined. And when you And by definition, by physics, you get more emissions when with full acceleration and full load at very low temperatures, you climb a hill, versus with a constant speed, with the normal payload, you go on a flat autobahn by physical definitions. And now you have not defined how much in these other situations their emission can and allowed to increase. Therefore, if they increase more, you have still followed the rule, but obviously the discrepancy between what you see on the test and what you measure in this full range now is a bigger one. And that is the fact that these two things are overlaying. The one does not do a good job, but he is acting legally, and the other one has broken a law, are now blended because both of them lead to different results than what you see on the test stand, and therefore it's understandable when people in the media say, well, that's all the same. It is not the same. It's definitely not the same, but I do understand that the big confusion is out there, and that's why I only can repeat what Eric just said. We definitely want to see a clear regulation ASAP, and then we can get over this whole confusion and have a very simple fact: you follow this and you get the right results, or you don't, and there's no gray area in between anymore.
And again, to build upon that, I mean, we want to fix, in order to restore the trust, we need to fix this emission issue. And that's the commitment also on our side. And we need to make sure that the regulatory environment to enable that is clear and adopted rather sooner than later.
But would you agree that there is a problem with the industry as far as the general public is concerned?
I just tried to explain it. Because of these two facts leading to comparable deviations, it's understandable that people ask, what is the difference? I tried to explain the difference, but I do understand that this is not transparent to everybody. Plus the fact that, of course, when we go into all these details, nobody else but specialists can in any form follow what you're talking. The same applies to RDE at that point of discussion, that what is really discussed, the general public cannot understand. Of course not, because far too specific in its technical context.
Okay, I think we have to close it there. Dr. Zetsche and Eric, you're not in a very tight schedule.